This was a terrazzo polishing project in Smethwick in the West Midlands. There was an original 1930s terrazzo floor that was in the hallway. The homeowner was doing quite a lot of refurbishment in the house, trying to bring it back to the original state, and after they lifted the carpet up, they found an old terrazzo floor in the hallway. They lifted all the carpet up and they found that generally the floor was in quite good condition. The only problems were that in a couple of doorways, the edge of the terrazzo had broken away, and previously somebody had tried to fill it with, or had filled it with cement, and over time that cement had broken, so it looked quite ugly. Also, along the sides of the floor, there were holes from where gripper rods had been taken away and the tacks had pulled out, pulling some of the black terrazzo away. On the main floor itself, it was very worn, so it had obviously been in use for many years. The marble chips were quite dull and rounded, which showed they had a lot of wear on them, but the Portland cement was also very worn. And in most cases, this happens because people use very strong alkaline cleaners to clean the floor, and the alkaline cleaners soften the Portland cement and make it very porous, and it goes very, very powdery. And as fashions change, people decide they don't want terrazzo and they want to put carpet in, so it must have been covered by carpet, and it could even possibly have been covered by lino at one time. Originally, when I quoted for the floor, I recommended the client have a low to mid-sheen finish, which is the finish that will have been on the floor when it was first installed, and thereafter it'll have been looked after by cleaning and possibly by waxing. But after chatting to the homeowner, and particularly the homeowner's wife, she preferred if the floor could be polished, which is no problem these days because we've got all the technology, the equipment and the chemicals to bring a beautiful polished finish to the floor. Also, in the corner of the floor, there was a cupboard that had a doorway and a lintel in. It wasn't going to cost any more just to do that small area as long as we knocked out the door lintel, which was no problem, and thankfully the door lintel hadn't been screwed into the floor itself, so there were no holes. It had just been nailed into the bottom of the door surround. So the first job I had to do was get the cement out of the repairs in the two doorways. So I had to use a hammer and a bolster, a hammer and a chisel, just to gently break away the cement and then lift it out by hand. And it came away quite easily, although it took a fair bit of time, to be perfectly honest. Underneath the cement repairs, the subfloor itself wasn't very stable, and there were quite a number of holes in it. So I poured in the free-flowing resin to bind together the loose parts of the subfloor and get them ready for the next repair. I then put in some fibre reinforcement just to ensure that the repair was going to be a strong repair and last for the lifetime of the floor. There were also some parts of the side of the floor that were broken and damaged, so I used those pieces and broke them down to create small chips that I could put into the repairs. So I made up a black resin repair compound and I added the chips to it and I filled the repairs in. I used the same black compound with chips in to repair the tack holes along the side of the floor. The resin normally takes an hour or two to cure and go off ready for grinding down, so I used that time to start grinding the floor. I started grinding the floor with 30 grit metal diamonds because really I needed to take 2 to 3 millimetres off the surface of the floor because in some parts the Portland cement in particular was very worn, so it took a number of passes to get the floor nice and smooth. Once the floor was nice and smooth, I then had to progressively hone the floor to take the scratches off and take the floor ready for densifying. And densifying is you add a chemical to the floor and the chemical hardens the Portland cement and makes it tougher and allows nice polished finish. That was basically the end of the first day to let the densifier dry on the floor. In the second day, I was able to grind and hone the repairs to make them flush with the floor, and the repairs in the doorway and the repairs with the door tracks. And I also had to use a hand grinder and hand polisher just to do the rest of the floor edges, particularly in the other doorways and when I went round into the cupboard and into the WC, because I couldn't take the risk of a machine just going across and possibly running at the WC and scratching the porcelain tiles in there. They were very nice porcelain tiles as well. So once I'd ground, honed and polished the edges, I then finished polished the whole floor itself, which took a number of passes of fine diamonds, and then I powder polished the floor. Unfortunately, my polishing machine caught a couple of pieces of grit, and about a third of the floor had to be repolished because there were little scratch marks in the floor, so it took me half a day longer than I would have planned to do. Once I'd polished and cleaned the floor, I took all of the protection that I'd put on to protect the walls against splashes, and then I applied a couple of coats of Impregnating Sealer. The Impregnating Sealer protects the floor against spills and also makes the floor much easier to clean. And my customers were absolutely delighted with the floor. They were really, really pleased. As my customer said, she's looking forward to seeing the sparkly lights in the floor in the daytime. As you can see from the photographs, the floor looks absolutely beautiful. I've given my customer care instructions, and by looking after the floor carefully, that finish should last for years. And the only thing that will happen to the finish is it'll gradually dull over years, but then if it's looked after properly, and probably in the next 2 to 5 years, a quick polish will bring the finish back up again. So if you've got a terrazzo floor that you found in some carpets and you'd like cleaning, please give me a call. I'd be happy to help. Thank you.
Contact Abbey Floor Care now for a free, no obligation quotation.